So in terms of applications, obviously mobile applications are one of the most revolutionary developments to happen to the mobile device, particularly the smartphone. It's really changed the way people interact with these devices. As the mobile web is still relatively behind in terms of the overall experience. What I mean by the mobile web, I mean actually going to a browser device and accessing the internet via your browser device on your mobile device, smartphone, whatever have you, versus an application that's resident on your actual device and you're clicking on it and actively using it. The mobile web still isn't, from an experience perspective, quite there, so we're seeing pretty high usage still of the actual using applications. In fact, when we ask Canadians in terms of as an overall, which do you prefer to use, a mobile application or to access the mobile web, and about 60% of Canadians say that they would prefer to actually have an application. And it's really, again, because of the fact that it's a much deeper, immersive experience than the actual mobile web itself. But the thing about across these generations, when you look at it, even the older boomers are all the way over to the right, 28%, that's 1 in 4 boomers are actually downloading and using these applications. So that's pretty incredible, actually. So I want to actually just talk a little bit about the idea of sharing. So I love this quote in terms of, the most important word on the internet is not search, although I think, Google and Bing would probably argue that. But anyway, it's more about the idea of sharing. And I think ever since really social has become a huge factor in our lives every day, the ability to actually share content, thoughts, ideas is obviously is a huge thing. In fact, overall, this is a general stat. Canadians are sharing content they find online with friends, an average of about somewhere between 60 and 65% of the time. Of that, the majority are still sharing on email, although things like Facebook as a social platform are very quickly catching up to that. So when we think of mobile behavior, obviously one of the things we think of, particularly I'm going to talk about this as it relates to sharing a little bit, but when we think of mobile behavior, the idea of using your mobile device to use Google Maps or locate stores and those kinds of things, literally be found, if you will, or finding these locations. Obviously the millennials, it's very high within that group. The boomers, they tend to be a little more cautious, although it still is growing and they're using it quite a bit. And again, they're using it more from the sense of to just basically locate stores. We're seeing the millennials, though, are connecting more to this ability that they can be found. So using things like Foursquare, and those of you that don't know what Foursquare is, well, if you go online and Google Foursquare, you'll find out a fair amount of information about it. But essentially, Foursquare, when it started, was very much like a game where you would literally go and you would check into a location, a physical location, via your mobile device. You'd say, I'm at this location, and you would literally tell all of your friends that are connected to Foursquare, and you can also connect Twitter and Facebook and other devices to it as well, but you'd tell them that you're actually at this location. So you'd advise everybody where you are. There's organizations and brands out there. Starbucks comes to mind as probably one that's utilizing it a lot, where they keep an eye on these people that are checking into these locations. And for example, they have something out right now where you check into, I think, 5 locations, you actually get a free coffee or latte for using Foursquare and checking these locations. So you're actually broadcasting to your friends. You're doing essentially free advertising for these people using your GPS and using your location-based capability of the phone. The other big thing around sharing is the idea of sharing pictures directly from your mobile device. And although the camera usage itself is very high, and we've seen it very high in terms of actually taking pictures, sharing, really varies more broadly across the board. So millennials and sort of younger boomers are fairly equal in terms of the actual ability to share, but boomers drop off fairly quickly. And the interesting thing about this as well is that although millennials, they do share a fair amount of pictures they find via Facebook and SMS and other capabilities the phone offers them, the boomers, younger boomers and older boomers, they tend to be doing it more in person. So they will take a picture of a product or service or a product or a price they see at a store, for example, or an event that they might be at, and then they will save it on their phone and then maybe show it to people later, download it to their desktop or laptop, and potentially share it that way versus directly from a mobile device. And, there's a lot of theories around why that is. One is the fact that it could be the data charges and the concerns around, sharing images and uploading, accessing the web. You're going to obviously get charged, a fair amount. I think there's probably more misconceptions around that than there's the reality, but it is essentially what the boomers are doing. So just a quick example, going back to the Canadian Opera Company and how we sort of leveraged this as an example. There was something called Opera Nation that the Canadian Opera Company runs every year, and one of the years they ran it, I think this is going back a couple of years now when they ran it, we were first involved with them. They asked us, this Opera Nation essentially, just to give you a little bit of background, it targets millennials, so it's bringing younger people in to sort of experience the actual opera itself. And this particular night is, people were pretty dressed up and they were very chic looking, if you will. And so we suggested to the Canadian Opera Company, well, why don't we run a little sort of contest, if you will, and have people, take pictures of their friends that were at the actual Opera Nation and upload them to Flickr, and we'll select the most chicest looking person and win some cool prizes. And it actually did fairly well in terms of getting a fair amount of people to participate in this.
Yeah, it was a much younger crowd that was much prepared to share those photos. At this time, Flickr was the primary photo sharing application. But as we've seen the past few years, that's been quickly taken over by TwitPic, Flixie, and a dozen other ones.
Now, we are seeing, though, that the boomer generation, they definitely are using these various different platforms such as Flickr or Picasso or whatever, but they still are a little more apprehensive about even the sharing factor, and it probably relates back to a little bit of what we talked about before in terms of the privacy thing and being able to identify the person versus it being more around, it's a secure platform to do that.
Yeah, well, certainly taking pictures of your kids could be a concern here. Taking pictures of your house, your car, your latest big purchases might be an issue.
And we actually see that obviously in this next slide, where Facebook and YouTube, obviously very big social platforms, where the number of visits that people are actually doing on Facebook versus the actual posting. Now, when we look at the millennial generation, clearly they're visiting a lot and they're also posting a lot, whether those are just comments and or actually posting more deeper and richer content there, versus the boomer generation, whether it's younger or older boomers. Clearly they're not necessarily posting. They're there, they're participating in terms of their visiting, but they're not necessarily actively posting and participating. This is another clear indicator of the difference of the generations in terms of the one-way communication of the boomer generation versus the two-way communication of the millennial generation, where they're much more comfortable and more active in this as well. There's also some indication as well that you see a lot of boomers signing up for things like Facebook, and to be honest, it's a lot to do with keeping tabs on their family members and kids and so forth. Although that is changing, we are seeing the older generations, they are starting to participate more and more. One thing we did with the Canadian Opera Company not that long ago, and I think there's been a number of these have been done, is something called COC Live. So this was in cooperation with CBC Radio 2, where we actually streamed one of the operas. In this case, I believe it was Madame Butterfly that was actually streamed, and there was literally, we opened up a conversation. So we had about 351 global participants that actually joined for a 3-hour chat. And clearly a lot of the people that were in there and they were actively involved were sort of these, let's call them younger boomers. So they were actively involved in the participation when they felt comfortable in the environment and what they were doing.
Yeah, in this case we actually made sure that we had an experienced host that was very knowledgeable for the experience. They shared They shared photos within the chat window, which was actually a Cover Live plugin, which is another Toronto company. And again, we had a lot of participation throughout the afternoon, and these offers being several hours long, we had people in and out, and we had people stick around with us for the entire afternoon. It was quite interesting.
So the last thing I'm going to touch on is just a little bit about purchase behavior, and we're actually starting to run a little short on time, so I want to just make this fairly quickly, and as we look at this. And, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of information out there around sort of purchase behavior, particularly around sort of online behavior. But what we thought we'd look at is just sort of who's really driving this trend. We look across these three distinct groups of people or demographics. And the millennials, no big surprise, they really are driving things like, books and MP3s and video games, a lot of digital content. There's really no big surprise there when you think of the sort of this high-teens generation, if you will, where they're very comfortable in this idea of purchasing that kind of content. Versus we look at younger boomers, and we look at the things they're doing, flight, travel-related event tickets. They're really trying to utilize the medium to make their life easier. Going back to that again, that it's really about trying to. They are very, very busy, so they're really trying to find the easiest way to do things and the ability to help them in their everyday life. Boomers, they tend to cross over. Older boomers tend to cross over a little bit, but they tend to be things like magazines, membership fees, those kinds of things they're signing up for or re-signing up for. They're comfortable giving that information to established places. And last example, again, with Canadian Opera Company, if we look at sort of the purchasing behavior that's happened with that organization, particularly after we did the sort of redesign work of the actual website, and from a ticket buying perspective, it really is that boomer generation that's driving most of the ticket buying, particularly that younger boomer generation. And again, it's all about making it easier for them to participate and do things. Not that the millennials are not in there doing it as well, but it tends to be a little more of the boomers and younger boomers that are actually doing the purchasing of those tickets online. And that could be a little bit more in terms of that as a big part of their primary audience.